Again, it's Ponce here, sort of on the PBE, with my final thoughts on Kayn, just sort of a final decision on what exactly I think of the character, balance issues, and all that sort of stuff. So, I said I was going to make this video in my previous one, so like that one, I'm also going to be live streaming the character as soon as I upload this thing. So if you happen to catch this video right as I upload it, I will be streaming on twitch.tv/Ponce like I usually am, so if you happen to have any questions, sort of want further elaboration on why I think the way I do, etc., or maybe I didn't... you know, explain some point particularly well or something like that, feel free to ask me, please, in the chat, and I will be more than happy to answer you. But anyway, to kind of sum up my thoughts here, in terms of what this character is, I suppose first what we have to do is we have to define what is he, essentially. And the way I've taken to phrasing him is that he's sort of essentially a slow-scaling, skirmishing, team assassin jungle, essentially. Now, this is the way I think of in my head, so this is going to change for everyone because, you know, we all think a bit differently. But basically, the way I think of him is a kind of a weird mishmash of Talon, Zed, Bard, and Yasuo. And how it actually plays out is he's designed to be weak early on, or at least that's, you know, I'm pretty sure he's designed to be weak early on. If Riot intended for him to be strong early on, they fucked up pretty hard. So I'm pretty sure that's intentional. His base form is actually quite bad at fighting people. I'm talking about before he does either of his transformation things. And again, that's pretty intended, I think. I think the biggest indication of this is the Q, in that the damage is almost doubled at rank 1 against jungle mobs. You get 55 bonus damage per hit thing, so 110 extra damage, which almost doubles the damage you deal right away to jungle mobs. So that's a pretty good indication as well that Riot wants this character to be played exclusively in the jungle. I mean, you can play him in lane, and I'll talk about that in a bit. I think maybe I don't want to talk about it too much, but I'm not a huge fan of it. But at any rate, note that that doesn't scale too, so that's a pretty good indication. Like, you get 55 bonus damage, and that's it. Like, it doesn't go anywhere from there, which is somewhat unusual. Now, the thing is, I also find that part of the problem with the character as well, because there's this very big sort of disconnect between his jungle PvE strength and his PvP strength. And that concept of there being a disconnect of what the character, how he looks and how he actually plays, is a sort of a reoccurring concept that I'll be talking about again in a bit. But it's just really weird, because it feels like there's this band-aid fix, or... essentially, so yeah, a band-aid fix stuck on the character. Bonus damage. Flat bonus damage at rank 1, and that never scales. And I actually kind of wonder if he could jungle at all if he didn't have that. But anyway, you get this kind of idea that he's this really powerful jungler. He's really strong. And your brain automatically starts to make these associations with other really strong junglers. And then by, you know, kind of from extension goes from there as well. This character's really good at the jungle. They do roughly this much damage, and are not necessarily damage, but they're roughly this capable of fighting other players when you go to do it. And then you go to do a gank or something, and then you discover, oh, wait a minute, this character actually sucks at fighting other people, at least especially early on. So I really wasn't a fan of that, you know. It feels it isn't related very well, like the actual strength of the character, because you're kind of good at one thing, and then it turns out you're actually not good at the other thing, namely PvP. Now, that's the main problem I'm having with this character, I suppose. This concept, again, of disconnect. In terms of how he actually plays out when you're fighting people, on some level he feels like a traditional style assassin, but after some time with playing with him, you know, you discover that he's actually really not, you know, despite the fact that one of his forms is called Shadow Assassin. He's more so what I've taken to calling a team assassin. He doesn't really kind of go in on his own and get everything done on his own solo. Like, he doesn't jump in, blow someone up, get out, and then that's kind of it sort of thing. He more so works with his allies to sort of pick apart the enemy over a medium duration of time. It's still relatively fast, but, you know, it's certainly not jump in, blow someone up, and that's it kind of thing. He essentially seems kind of like the new design philosophy Riot seems to have adopted with assassins, and the potential of giving the enemy counterplay opportunities. Sort of kind of like what they tried with that medium scope assassin rework they did a little while back, but like really kind of taking that to heart. Now the problem with that is, essentially that sort of idea, I suppose, is it's noble. It's a noble aspiration in and of itself. But the problem is, you know, the archetype of the fed as fuck assassin still exists. You know, the one that just goes in, blows something up, and you don't get a chance to do anything, and then he gets the hell out. You know, effectively stuff like Zed, Talon, Katarina, and even Jarvan, for example, you want to build them that way, assassinate more effectively than this character does. So the characters I just mentioned, those sorts of characters seem to... I don't know, it seems like they're less balanced around the concept of mobility. So if you imagine the example of like an RPG character creation process, it's like they're effectively not paying any of their, you know, character creation skill points for the mobility stat, so they can just dump everything into the murder people stat, you know, strength, dex, you know, whatever you want to call it, the damage stat, effectively. Meanwhile, you know, poor Kayn, you know, he is forced to work under this new, more essentially fair system. So, you know, I don't mind that this is a thing, but again, the problem is it's just he seems to be singled out, and it's kind of it feels sort of unfair for him. Now, keep in mind he is very, very mobile, and I think it's a good thing that he's paying for this utility and mobility. If he wasn't, we'd have a whole different set of issues. Like, you know, if he killed like Zed, but is always mobile as he is. That'd be problematic, but the problem sort of exists aside from the fact that, you know, those other characters that I mentioned earlier exist, is that providing enemies with such a large window of opportunity to counter what you're doing is, yeah, like there are other factors that kind of mash together, and they're like, it seems like they're almost synergistic to make things more hard for you. For example, the fact that he scales slowly is really a bit of a problem. And there's an extra issue when people start getting grouped up. So, and that's further compounding things, because you scale late, and then people are already grouping at that point. And then at that point, his playstyle is really kind of, it's effectively shut down. Now, he's really... What he's really good at is, even late game, is theoretically, if someone's off wandering on their own, he's really good at making picks and ensuring that they die and kind of killing them over, again, a medium length of time. A medium length of time makes it probably sound like it takes longer for him to kill than it actually does. But, again, I'm comparing it to that instant pop, you know, Zed showed up, you're dead, or, for example, I don't know, Fed Assassin build Jarvan shows up and you're dead kind of thing. But the thing is, once everyone starts to group up, that window of opportunity, that counterplay opportunity you're giving people, effectively at that point, the entire team has the opportunity to counterplay you. So it just becomes worse and worse and worse. Now, in terms of what I was talking about with the scaling and the slow scaling, he only really feels like really good as a champion about 3 items in. Now, in certain instances, if you're scaling or if you're snowballing really hard, you can start feeling quite good a bit earlier, especially with the assassin form. I've noticed, you know, even with 2 items in, you could start to carry decently. But the problem with this whole 3-item, you're really good thing, and before that, you're kind of trash, is that in League of Legends, generally speaking, by the time you make it to your 3rd major, like, expensive item, the game tends to be more or less decided in terms of which way the game is, like, if it's not all outright done, it's like really hardly swinging in one direction or the other. It's that first part of the game that's really important, that, you know, you're doing well in. And this character just, I don't know, again, he can't seem to really do that early on. So typically what ends up happening is that the character feels great when it already should be feeling great, because everyone on your team is doing well and you've managed to scale really well. And then he just feels extra bad in those instances where... you know, everyone on your team is sort of losing, and you can kind of string them along because you're suddenly strong, but it ultimately ends up being kind of a futile effort. Now, again, that's more of a League of Legends issue, like, because again, if every character was strong in the early game, no one would be strong in the early game, essentially. Like, there does need to be that kind of balance, and, you know, different characters do different things, but, you know, in the context of solo queue, that really makes me not a fan of him too much. So essentially what this boils down to in terms of the 2 separate forms is that I really actually prefer, at least, you know, in the last few days, I've really started to prefer the red form, the darkened form, much more. Because, as I mentioned, the Shadow Assassin form might be able to spike a little bit earlier sometimes. The Darken form sort of deals with team fights a lot better, since he can get like kind of in there and function in sort of a bruiserious fashion, which seems to work better with this intended playstyle. You know, that whole sort of melee skirmisher that kills people over some length of time and not instantly. Granted, if you go red form, it's going to stretch that time, you know, period of time out longer, but at least you tend to survive your encounter with the enemy. And again, if he's going to be, like, as I mentioned, a team assassin, as I phrased it, you know, you may as well just, like, fully straight up work with your team. Like, get in there early, set up the fight, and then make sure that the DPS can come in before you've been instantly blown up, in a sense. Because, you know, the longer you survive, there's more leeway for your team to actually, you know, react and do something properly. Because that's something you have to take into consideration as well. It's like, how able is your team, how able are they to react to what you're doing? And the larger window you give them, you know, essentially the less chance they have to screw the whole thing up. But anyway, those are my general thoughts on the character. I realize this comes off as probably very negative, maybe. So to kind of essentially, I don't know, temper everything I've said thus far, I don't think he's a terrible character. I think he's balanced in a very fair sort of way, and under certain contexts, he can be very powerful. Especially if your playstyle sort of suits this sort of thing, that melee skirmisher in and out, scale late game sort of thing. But if you're definitely looking to carry in the early game as an old style assassin and just sort of pop people, and then, well, basically pop multiple people with very little opportunity for counterplay, I think you're going to be disappointed in what this character provides. So it's a matter of just sort of tempering your expectations, or at least making your expectations a bit more realistic in terms of what this character actually does. And for me, that is, I don't know, I found it a bit disappointing. Before we end this thing, I probably should mention, as I said, we would talk very briefly about laning. I don't want to do that too much because I haven't laned with him too many times, but in my few experiences with it, I found him very lackluster. I don't think he's a terrible, terrible laner. I think you can get away with it. It's just basically every time I've played him, I've sort of found that everything he does, other characters do better early on, anyway. You're basically negating his main strength of mobility and roam because you're stuck in a lane. So, I mean, I guess maybe you could, if you took him mid, it would be less a problem. But certainly top, where it kind of feels like he might belong sometimes. Yeah, the roam potential is quite squandered. And again, it just kind of like feels like you have to think too hard about every single engagement and trade you have to do. Because, you know, he's got mana issues. If you go in kind of blind, you get out-traded. And that's sort of the hallmark to me of a good laner, is that basically how little do you have to think about whether or not the trade is... I was just running a YouTube video in the background, so let's just pause that. But, you know, how hard do you have to think about whether or not this is a good trade? So if you have a character that's like, for example, oh, I'm going to walk in, right-click on someone in queue, and I'm probably going to win the trade. That's probably a really good top laner. It means they're very strong at what they do. It's this minimal brain effort. Now, to compare that to if you have a character that's like, okay, let's see now, if I shuffle around here and I kind of step back and forth and get him to waste this skill to ensure that he can't use that in combat, and I shape the wave so that if I engage on having this many minions exactly and he gets hit by exactly 6 ranged minion shots, and then I wait for my cooldown to exit immediately after I use this skill here, and then hopefully I don't get ganked, I'll probably slightly out-trade him. You know, that's probably the sign of a character that's not all that great in lane, and that's generally been my experience with them. It's like having to consider really hard whether or not I should be taking this trade or not. Now, again, that could also be a matter of experience. So, again, that's why I said I don't really want to talk about this nearly as much as I've been talking about the jungle, but there you have it. I'm just going to tack that on at the end there. So, yeah. Those are my thoughts on the character. Hope you found this informative and useful. And like I said, if you happen to catch this video, you know, within a few hours of me uploading it, I will be streaming. So I'm free to answer questions and all that, and, you know, explain different builds, and et cetera, et cetera. Maybe go into slightly more detail than I have in this video. So yeah, see you guys around. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you in the stream. Goodbye.